New Zealand's Prime Minister announces a swift overhaul of gun laws as funerals begin for victims of terrorist attacks on two mosques. The possible similarities in two deadly plane crashes. We'll have a report from Paris where experts are analysing the black boxes from the recent Ethiopian Airlines disaster. Plus, we could see another Brexit vote this week, but the third time might not be the charm for Theresa May. Thanks for joining us. I'm Max Foster in London. This is CNN Newsroom. As New Zealand mourns the 50 people murdered in Friday's terrorist attack, it's also facing a defining moment. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the government has agreed in principle to toughen gun ownership laws. This is the store in Christchurch that sold weapons to the alleged killer. Mrs Ardern said many New Zealanders are questioning the availability of military-style semi-automatic weapons.
Also acknowledge, when Australia found itself tragically in a similar position to what we find ourselves now, they took 12 days to make their decision. We have taken 72 hours. There is, though, still some detail that needs to be worked through. I want to do that, but still move as quickly as we can.
Victims' families are waiting for the remains of their loved ones to be returned to them. Police have now released one of the bodies. Police say the man they believe carried out the attacks is an Australian citizen. Police raided the home of his sister in Sandy Beach, New South Wales. New Zealand police say they're certain the attacks at both mosques were carried out by the same man.
I want to definitely state that we believe that there was only one attacker responsible for this horrendous event. There were two scenes, as you know, and again I would like to state that we believe absolutely there was only one attacker responsible.
The 28-year-old suspect accused of murder says he doesn't want a lawyer and wants to represent himself in court in April. That's according to the attorney temporarily assigned to him on the day of his arrest. The suspect's grandmother says the family is shocked.
It's only since he travelled overseas, I think, that boy has changed completely to the boy we knew. It's just so much for everything to take in that somebody in our family would do anything like this.
Well, indeed, as his grandmother suggested there, in his manifesto, shooting suspect Brenton Tarrant acknowledges his attitudes changed after travelling the world. Now investigators want to know what exactly he learned during those travels. Alwyn Damon has the detail.
Brenton Tarrant was quite well traveled, especially in the years leading up to his despicable massacre in Christchurch. He had gone to Egypt, Greece, made several trips to different Balkan countries. He also went to Bulgaria, came here to Turkey on one occasion for up to 43 days, and also went to Pakistan in October of 2018, where the owner of one of the hotels describes him as being just a normal tourist. What investigators in these different countries are now going to be trying to determine is whether or not these trips were part of perhaps a normal curiosity to travel the world, or if already at the time there was a more ominous intent. He did display a level of interest in the history, but especially the decline of the Ottoman Empire. And in his hate-filled manifesto, he says that it was during his travels, especially to Europe back in 2017, where he says his perspective began to change following the attack that took place in Stockholm, where a man who claimed affiliation to ISIS plowed a truck into a street filled with shoppers. There has continued to be widespread condemnation of this attack. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan blaming it specifically on a rise in Islamophobia, calling on all countries, but especially Western countries, to do their part. But at the same time, Turkey's president seems to already be politicizing this horrific attack. At political rallies over the weekend, the president aired clips from the attackers' videos that had images of the victims blurred, but showed the attack being carried out nonetheless. Now, it is worth noting that Turkey itself has very strict laws when it comes to broadcasting the aftermath of terrorist attacks that do take place on its own soil. This is presumably going to cause more fallout and tensions between Turkey, New Zealand, and perhaps other countries as well, just days after the world is still reeling from this horrific massacre. Arwa Damon, CNN, Istanbul.
You heard a moment ago how New Zealand's Prime Minister says her cabinet has already agreed in principle to change gun laws. Right now, the country's gun laws are considered more relaxed than most Western countries outside the US. Whilst New Zealand's gun owners need a licence, they aren't required to register their guns. They must be over 16 and pass a police background check. It's estimated New Zealand is about 1.2 million guns for a nation of close to 5 million people. Now, earlier, Ivan Watson spoke with University of Sydney professor Philip Alpers about gun laws in New Zealand. Here's part of what he had to say.
New Zealand gun laws are really pretty tight, certainly compared to the United States. Pretty well everyone is, but they have some big loopholes, big gaps in them, and those gaps have been inserted at the insistence of the gun lobby to make sure that they don't inconvenience people, and they allowed this thing to happen in Christchurch. It was those gaps in the law which enabled the gunman to do what he did. He's an Australian. He came from Australia to New Zealand to commit this crime, but in Australia he would never have been able to buy those firearms. They've all been banned, confiscated, destroyed, and a fair market price has been paid for them by the government. So he couldn't have got those guns in Australia. One has to ask, did he go to New Zealand because it was a soft target?
Well, we're going to speak to Ivan right now. He's in Christchurch, New Zealand. Obviously, lots of debate about gun laws, but also a big moment of commemoration today.
Yeah, that's right, Max. It has been 3 days since the most deadly terror attack in New Zealand's modern history. And here at this makeshift memorial site by the Botanical Gardens in this city, the visitors are still coming, still laying flowers, still putting up signs like "We stand with our Muslim neighbors," and I still see tears on people's faces. This is a community that has been shocked by the scale of the violence here. So extreme that Christchurch Hospital, for example, has had to postpone previously scheduled surgeries to keep some of the critically wounded people alive who've had to receive multiple surgeries. The police say this is the biggest investigation they have ever mounted. The police commissioner saying that the attacks on 2 separate mosques in the city on Friday afternoon during Friday prayers was the work of one man. The suspect here is 28-year-old Brenton Tarrant. He is an Australian who had no previous criminal record, neither in New Zealand nor in Australia, who had purchased guns legally in this country. And we've learned from one business here in New Zealand, Gun City, that it sold 4 firearms to this individual, though the authorities are saying that some of the weapons were modified to make them more legal. One business here that sells online, that's called Trade Me, has announced in the wake of this shooting that it will be banning the sale, at least temporarily, of semi-automatic weapons. Meanwhile, the government has announced it will introduce new policies for gun control within 10 days of Friday's terrorist attacks. We don't know what steps those might be yet. There are some 1.2 million guns, firearms in New Zealand, a country of some 4 million people. Do the math. That's about 1 gun for every 3 or 4 people in this country, much more than the ratio in Australia, for example. And some experts say that the suspected attacker may have used loopholes and these softer gun laws to be able to carry out the attack in this country. As for victims, the anguished families still wait to be reunited with the bodies of their slain loved ones. And that's another area where the authorities are struggling. 50 people killed in this city. It has taken days to process the victims and to begin returning them back to their loved ones. The police working very closely with Islamic community leaders promising to release the victims as soon as possible so that they can be buried according to Islamic custom. Max?
Ivan in Christchurch, thank you. Coming up on CNN Talk, we want to know what you think. How can we stop the spread of far-right violence? Gun control might make it harder for terrorists to get weapons, but how do you change attitudes? So log on to facebook.com/CNN International to have your say. CNN Talk starting at 11 a.m. here in London. That's 7 p.m. in Hong Kong. More details on the Ethiopian Airlines crash are emerging. Early analysis of what caused the tragedy and what the Ethiopian Transport Secretary told CNN coming up. And as New Zealand remembers the victims of Friday's terrorist attack, Facebook is in the spotlight over its response. That's coming up too. But the Christchurch community is refusing to bow down to hate. High school students paid their respects to the victims by performing a haka, a traditional Maori dance. We'll be right back.